Next on Brute Force, the history of weapons at war. It's the most complex of military maneuvers, the amphibious assault. Trace the history of this unique brand of warfare from Guadalcanal and Normandy to Incheon and the Persian Gulf. Plus, the development of the amphibious assault vehicle, from a simple rescue tractor to one of the most versatile pieces of military hardware. Amphibious warfare, next on Brute Force, the history of weapons at war.
A country fortunate enough to border an ocean could count on that natural barrier to protect itself from foreign aggressors. Rarely could an invader launch an armada capable of landing soldiers on a defended coastline. It was a slow and awkward process where a shift in tide or wind could scuttle the entire force. Amphibious assaults required a weapon that could bring warriors ashore and race them across the beach with enough protection and firepower to destroy the enemy. Camp Pendleton, California, home of the 3rd Assault Amphibian Battalion, 1st Marine Division. To maintain their constant state of readiness, these men prepare to exercise the most complex of military maneuvers, the amphibious assault landing.
Complexity arises from the fact that in amphibious warfare, you have two distinct components that have to work together very closely. There's the naval component, which is obvious because you have to transport the force over water for a landing on a foreign or hostile shore. And then, of course, there's the landing force, which is usually comprised of Marines or Army troops that have been trained for amphibious warfare.
Many of these Marines are veterans of the war in the Persian Gulf, but who knows where they will be sent next? In the past, amphibious warriors have stormed the beaches of such far-flung places as the Philippines, North Africa, Tarawa, and Normandy. In all of these campaigns, a vital role was played by amphibious assault vehicles.
We loaded them down heavier than they should have been, asked them to do things that they shouldn't have been asked to do, and they did an outstanding job.
The vehicle's glorious record in battle belies its humble origins in the swamps of Florida, where in the early 1930s, Donald Roebling, grandson of the builder of the Brooklyn Bridge, designed a hurricane rescue vehicle.
Which was essentially an aluminum box flotation device and with an engine in it that turned a track on which were mounted cleats. And this provided propulsion both on land and in the water.
The vehicle, known as the Alligator, impressed the Marines.
Roebling initially wasn't interested in doing anything with the military, but by 1940 he'd agreed to build a model for the Marines for $20,000. He built it for 16, delivered it later on that year, and then had a very difficult time trying to reimburse the government $4,000. It's unheard of, but he tried.
Croizat, a member of the 1st Marine Tractor Detachment, was among the first to test the new vehicle.
When it came to the amphibious tractor, no one knew anything about it. In fact, Roebling didn't know very much about it in the sense of the operational concepts we were trying to develop. And he had never tried coming in through the surf. So we went out, we ran it through the surf, we ran it through the swamps, and we developed a great deal of just purely operational information. And then we started doing some formation work to see how easy it was to maintain formation. Because these are ungainly boxes. We felt that the thing had a great deal of potential. We felt that we were on the inside track of something that was really interesting. It was completely different than anything that we had. There were no regulations. We were writing the book on it.
Roebling contracted the first amphibian tractors for marine use. In July 1941, they debuted the Landing Vehicle Tract, or LVT-1, the first of the so-called Amtraks.
The LVT-1 was a unique vehicle, and the only reason we ended up by having something like 1,200 of them manufactured was that they were beginning to build them before the war broke. When the war broke, the requirement was so great, they froze the model.
The LVT-1s were used in America's first big amphibious assault, Guadalcanal, in August 1942.
Guadalcanal was a very hastily put-together operation. The amphibian tractor was found to be a very useful vehicle to follow up right behind the assault infantry, bringing ammunition, bringing water, bringing rations, and evacuating wounded. And it started in the role that it continued throughout the war. So, from the very first, it proved to be an extremely versatile vehicle.
From a distance, Guadalcanal looked like a tropical paradise. But on shore, if the heat and bugs didn't get you, the malaria and Japanese fire would. Croizat commanded the first Amtrak company to go ashore.
Going into combat is an interesting problem because you take stock of your fears when you're by yourself. Once you're there and once you've got a job, once the Admiral land the landing force and set the hour to go, and everybody turns to and gets very, very busy, then this whole business of being scared, it's in the back of your mind.
Working overtime in a support role eventually took its toll on the Amtraks.
The main thing on Guadalcanal was a universal shortage of supplies, which meant that the maintenance capabilities of the units was seriously, seriously deficient, with the result that in short order, most of the amphibian tractors broke down.
In spite of the breakdowns and shortages, the Marines wrested Guadalcanal from the Japanese after an intense 4-month campaign. It was Japan's first land defeat of the war. In victory, the Amtraks performed better than expected. With improvements, they would be poised for their first use as combat vehicles at Tarawa, bloody Tarawa. Guadalcanal was the Marines' first stop on a 4-year island hopping campaign across the Pacific. Their objective was to get as close to Japan as possible and invade the country if necessary. The Amtrak's ability to overcome natural obstacles contributed greatly to the success of this mission, particularly at Iwo Jima and Tarawa.
Tarawa was an atoll, and the target island, was BTO, and that was a very small island. We're talking about a couple of miles. It's just an airstrip.
Though small in size, Tarawa was fringed with large coral reefs. It was thought that in certain tidal conditions, they might be too shallow to cross in regular landing boats.
The Navy held that there was plenty of water. Some of the people who had lived there that had been interrogated said that there might not be, and the Marines were very much concerned with it, and the only vehicle that they had that could answer to the requirement was the amphibian tractor.
A new amphibian tractor, the LVT-2, was introduced in 1943. Intended for combat, the 2 was a major improvement over the LVT-1.
The LVT-2 which Food Machinery developed itself with a suspension on the track and then practically double the horsepower on the engine, was a significant improvement. So the LVT-2 that came out the first time it was used was in Tarawa.
The first wave of Marines made it over Tarawa's treacherous reefs in the LVTs. But for those that followed in conventional flat-bottom boats, it was a different story.
The boats couldn't get in. You have a coral reef, a fringing reef on the islands of the Central Pacific, sometimes is a mile out. And so if you're using boats, the boats cannot go in, they'll tear the bottom out, and so that the troops will have to wade. Now the coral reef is not a nice uniform piece of real estate on which you could walk. It's full of holes and all sorts of problems. So that even if you could get out and walk in the water for a mile, you still have a great deal of difficulty.
Half of the Marines wading ashore were killed by heavy Japanese fire. Those who did make it onto the beaches engaged in some of the fiercest combat of the Pacific War. The Japanese commander had boasted that 1 million men cannot take Tarawa in 100 years. But it took 5,600 Marines 3 days to do just that. Historians have given the Amtraks much credit for the victory at Tarawa.
The amphibian tractors, they had very, very little armor plate, but there was enough to enable most of the troops to get in with relatively light casualties.
But victory at Tarawa was costly. 1,000 Marines and 4,500 Japanese lost their lives there. The battle took its toll on the Amtraks, too.
A number of the Amtraks got hit on the way in, and as a matter of fact, all told, as I recall, there were 125 Amtraks went in, and 3 days later there were 39 of them left. But it would have been impossible by boat.
The Amtraks conquered the reefs of Tarawa, but 2 years later, at Iwo Jima, they would be challenged by yet another natural obstacle, the island's volcanic ash.
Volcanic ash was so loose, much looser than ordinary sand. And every time an infantryman would take a couple steps forward, he would slide back 3 or 4.
After Iwo Jima had been subjected to over 70 days of pre-assault bombardment, the longest in the Pacific, Klavan and his fellow Marines boarded their landing boats and headed towards the island.
I think everybody was wondering how they're going to make it, if they're going to take their share of the enemy, and if they're going to be killed or wounded, and if they're going to be wounded, how bad, and things like that. It was scary. I mean, I don't care who you are. You're scared when you go into something like that.
But before he even landed, Klavan witnessed firsthand how vulnerable an amphibious fighter can be.
Approximately 25 yards before we were supposed to land, the coxswain dropped the ramp and said something to the effect, "You Marines, get the hell out of here." And he stopped the engine, put it in neutral, and the guys were going over the side and out the ramp. And fortunately, it wasn't too deep. It was about up to our chest. And before the last man was off, he started backing out. And he hadn't gone 50 yards, and a shell landed right in the middle of that landing craft and did a number on him.
Once on shore, it was difficult to operate in the volcanic ash.
Jeeps and trucks and tanks could not traverse the volcanic sand. They had 3 terraces about 15 feet high before we got up to the first airfield. But the only vehicles that really made it was the Amtraks.
The Amtraks used at Iwo Jima were LVT-4s, the most widely used amphibian tractors in the war. They were a redesigned LVT-2.
The next step was to take the engine, which was situated in the back of the LVT-2, move that up forward, and put a ramp in the rear. That's the LVT-4. And what that did was it gave you a vehicle, a same size vehicle, same components, same everything, but it could carry about 5 to 10 more troops. You could put 25, 30 people in there. And also you could carry a 105, you could carry a Jeep, so it was a much, much more flexible vehicle. The Amtrak came in with the assault troops and then immediately found itself putting artillery in a position and above all, keeping the infantry supplied with ammunition and with water, which is always a problem of great consumption of water in combat, and then evacuating the wounded.
And there were many wounded to evacuate, over 19,000. In 4 days of fighting, 22,000 Japanese and almost 7,000 Marines were dead. A third of all Marines killed in the war.
Today, when I think of Iwo, it was almost like a nightmare, like I wasn't there. But it was the worst battle in Marine Corps history as far as casualties go.
By June of 1944, the Allied armies prepared themselves to breach Fortress Europe in what General Eisenhower described as a great human spring coiled for the moment that its energy should be released. The plan was codenamed Operation Overlord, and it all began on D-Day. Though D-Day is known as being the most famous amphibious assault in history, ironically, Amtraks were not used in the invasion.
They weren't necessary. There was no reef obstacle. The main battle was fought on Omaha Beach. That was the most deadly of the landing areas, but the requirement wasn't there.
In fact, Amtraks were hardly required in the entire Atlantic theater of operation.
From the physical point of view, just the geography, the reef problem didn't exist in Europe. The beaches were clear. There were rocky beaches and all sorts of those kind of hydrographic obstacles, but nothing comparable to what you had in the Central Pacific.
Then again, there was nothing in the Pacific comparable to the Atlantic Wall. An elaborate series of obstacles and defenses constructed by 500,000 German soldiers along the Normandy beaches of France. When it was completed, Hitler, in a boast similar to that made by the Japanese commander at Tarawa, declared, "No power on earth can drive us out of this region against our will."
We had information that we could expect as high as 50% casualties after we landed.
26 miles away across the English Channel, the largest amphibious force ever seen, comprised of 280,000 troops, 4,000 ships, and 20,000 vehicles, prepared for Operation Overlord.
You're scared as hell. And the second thing is that you know that if you stay on that beach that you're going to get wiped out. And there's no boats back there to back you up because they aren't going to take you off. They left you there, so you got to get inland. You got to get up there and get cover and so forth. The only way to do it is to knock out the enemy.
Because of its scope and importance, the invasion of Normandy serves as a prime illustration of what is known as the pattern of amphibious assault, the synchronized plan of attack in which everyone in the Armada knows what to do and when.
Our unit assignment on D-Day was to land on the beach and to go up over the hill and into a small town which was about 8-10 miles inland.
The pattern of the Normandy invasion called for pre-assault airstrikes of enemy targets and landings by paratroopers to cut off supply routes and secure positions inland. Soon after, the Armada headed for the Normandy coast. At 2 a.m., they stopped, and the troops left their LCIs, or landing craft infantry, and boarded their landing boats.
when we got off of this LCI, the water was going up and down about 20 feet. And so if you didn't get off at the right time, well, you usually had to drop about 20 feet, so you had to be really careful.
Filled with troops, the ICVPs, or landing craft vehicle personnel, headed for the beaches.
My thoughts about whether it was going to be killed or not was, I think, up to fate at that time, because every time you land on a beach, well, you know a lot of people are going to get killed, and you just hope that you're not one of them.
Intense airstrikes and naval bombardments of the Atlantic Wall provided cover for the approaching landing force.
The thing that was going through my mind was the awesome amount of ships and planes and firing on the beaches that was going on at the time. I think we saw, from our own viewpoint, about 800 planes at one time overhead. And that's something to see. You just can't believe that until you see it.
At dawn on June 6, 1944, the landing force invaded.
We got on the beach, the men that were there were already pinned down, and so we just had to keep on moving. There wasn't any place for us to stay on the beach. There had been people who had tried to make the assault up the beach, but they stepped on mines and things like this, so you had bodies to the right and bodies to the left, and you just had to go on through. It was a pretty sad story. We had in our company about 30% casualties when we landed.
One of the men who did not make it was Eller's brother, Roland.
My brother was in a different company. He landed on this LCI, one of these ships, and he had a mortar squad, and he and his whole squad were on the ramp at the same time, coming down, and a German 88 shell hit the ramp and knocked out the whole squad at one time.
But Walt Ehlers persevered. For knocking out several enemy machine gun nests and risking his own life to protect his squad, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor.
All these guys that gave their lives for their country are heroes. And you can't take that away from them. They're the ones that really made it happen. And of course, the rest of us survived. We helped make it happen, but the point is that we were all on the line, and it could have been any one of us. And we're just one of the lucky ones that got out of it.
Normandy was a completely different kind of amphibious assault from that being conducted in the Pacific.
We had nothing in the way of the buildup, the tremendous buildup that there was in Normandy. Once the beaches were seized and cleared, the pipeline started flowing and feeding in troops, so that the troops were very, very quickly. You had 500,000 men operating in northern France. We did not have this kind of a capability or a requirement in the Pacific. We might have had, or we would have had, I should say, had we invaded Japan.
The closest the Pacific Fleet got to invading Japan was only 300 miles away on the island of Okinawa. There, in April 1945, the last and largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War took place. All told, there were some 600 amphibious landings in World War II, ranging in size from river crossings to full-scale operations. The deployment of the Amtraks provided a margin of victory in many a battle. But in spite of such distinguished service, the future of the Amtraks were in doubt after World War II. After World War II, much of the Marines' Amtrak fleet was damaged, destroyed, or sold off to Allied nations. More importantly, the very strategy of amphibious warfare was questioned.
It required the massing of ships, which presented a very lucrative target to nuclear weapons, which in those days were the great weapon of the future. There's a great threat that if there were nuclear weapons used, this was untenable to concentrate that much shipping, and that there was no requirement anticipated for the amphibious operation.
But no one anticipated the Korean War.
Only about 5 years had elapsed since the end of World War II, when Korea broke out in 1950. So nothing much had been done in amphibious warfare to change it from what took place in World War II.
This new war, with amphibious assault potential, required a new Amtrak.
The vehicle that the Marines used was an LVT-3C in Korea, and this was an improvement over the World War II LVT-3 in that it was covered and therefore provided the troops with additional protection from the elements such as the surf and the sun, and also from strafing attacks by aircraft.
These Amtraks would be needed in a bold attack planned by General Douglas MacArthur.
He decides that the solution to his problem is to end run the North Korean forces that are operating in the southern end of the peninsula by hitting them at Incheon.
MacArthur knew it was a great risk. He characterized it as a 5,000 to 1 gamble, but he said he was used to taking those kind of odds. I think he said that facetiously, but nevertheless that gives you some idea of what a great risk it was.
Nobody agreed with him because Incheon had 30-foot tides and all sorts of hydrographic problems, but he ruled them over, and then he had a certain imperial manner, and as a matter of fact, the thing worked beautifully.
They had over 230 ships involved, and 120 of those were amphibious ships that transported the troops. The remainder, of course, were used for naval gunfire support, air support, and to just protect the area in general. MacArthur's idea was to hit them in the solar plexus, as he said, in the Seoul-Incheon area. Now, this operation was conceived for the month of September, the war having started in June, and it was very important that it be conducted at that time because the typhoon season was coming up. The tidal situation in Incheon was critical, and it just had to be done, or there would not be another opportunity for at least a month afterwards.
After the invasion at Incheon, the Amtraks were vital in the Han River crossing, which made the retaking of Seoul possible.
What the Amtrak started to do there was to start to be used for river crossing operations as they would be subsequently in Vietnam and elsewhere.
In Vietnam, we had very little amphibious operations, as most of our operations were done on land and crossing rivers.
These landings sometimes were independent operations, sometimes they were done in coordination with ground maneuvers.
In the rainy season, we were the only thing that could move.
The only thing that could move was the new Amtrak, the LVTP-5.
70,000-pound vehicle, 800 horsepower engine. With an overhead on it. It was a completely sealed box. You had claustrophobia, you'd better keep out of it. And it carried about 25 troops and 10,000 pounds of cargo. Had a ramp, forward. It was a good vehicle.
This is a model of an LVT-P5. It's made out of ceramics I made years ago. And this is model being unique in the fact that it's the first vehicle we had with a front ramp, with a ramp in the front. This has a cargo hatches here on the top, which open up to take embarked troops or cargo during transfer at sea. Now, originally, the LVT-P5 was designed to be 80% water use, 20% land use. But in Vietnam, it was the opposite. And using that vehicle on that particular type terrain was very hard on the suspension system, especially with the water and the mud and everything is hard on the wheels and the tracks, and they wear out fast. And we had a really tough maintenance problem during this time frame, but we were able to keep them running. With the LVT P5 vehicle at that time, for every 1 hour's operation, you had 4 hours of maintenance.
These machines were used primarily as armored personnel carriers. They'd pick up the infantry and they would work the infantry into position. Many of the operations were envelopment operations. So you had the infantry taking positions, and then you had forces carrying these troops around. And so the considerable utilization of the amphibian tractor was as armored personnel carriers.
As personnel carriers, the Amtraks became targets of the Viet Cong. For good reason, the Marines rode outside the vehicle.
We did not carry any military personnel inside the vehicle. We had them setting on top of the vehicle, so if we did hit a mine and it blew, it would blow them off the sides.
The Amtraks performed admirably under these adverse conditions, but after Vietnam, just as after World War II, the Amtrak's future was again questioned.
After the P5, there was very little done on developing further the amphibian tractor, and as a matter of fact, for a while it looked like the amphibian tractor was going to be replaced by the helicopter.
Military strategists soon realized that the helicopter would not be a suitable replacement for the amphibian tractor.
The helicopter couldn't do it all, and not only that, but the helicopter had to have a platform to operate from. And whereas the amphibian tractor could operate from the amphibian ships that were available, the helicopters could only operate from carriers. So it wasn't until we started getting specialized amphibious shipping that could handle helicopters, and which today handle helicopters and the air-cushioned vehicles, that you could begin to work in this capability.
The air-cushioned vehicle, also known as the LCAC, is similar in principle to commuter ferries currently in operation.
The air-cushioned vehicle, which incidentally is used in service across the English Channel today, anybody can buy a ticket and ride it, basically uses ducted fans to blow downward and lift the vehicle off the ground on a cushion of air, which is kept under the vehicle by a skirt. The propeller and the rudder, acting exactly the way they do in an airplane, drives the vehicle over the water. Now, the interesting thing is that the vehicle can go right up on land and can negotiate obstacles.
As a military vehicle, the LCAC has revolutionized the strategy of amphibious warfare.
The development of the LCAC air cushion vehicle, which has a 40-plus knot capability and can achieve over-the-horizon landings because of the high speed of the landing craft, giving a great element of surprise. And they can also proceed inland in the same vehicles beyond the surf zone, which has always been a critical zone and difficult to handle men and cargo in the surf zone, to a good, safe landing area where there's tractability for vehicles and it's dry and you're not facing the ocean behind you.
17 of the U.S. Navy's LCACs saw action for the first time in Operation Desert Storm. On the second day of the ground war, they landed the 5th Marine Expeditionary Brigade, comprised of 7,300 men, plus weapons and supplies, on the Kuwait-Saudi border. Even in such a limited support role, the LCACs intimidated the Iraqi forces.
If you are sitting on the beach and you have a force laying off there, that your intelligence tells you, and your intelligence in this case was reading the morning paper, that you got 5,000 Marines sitting out there with all of the amphibious shipping, and you can see heavy gun ships. You've been under fire from missiles. You see all that out there, and you know that the guy has got a capability of coming in on the beach. You got two choices. You can either prepare to receive him, or you can get out. And if you prepare to receive him, which is what the normal choice would be, it takes a lot of troops to do that. So that the existence of the force, by doing nothing, tied down a number of divisions.
In addition to the LCAC, the latest Amtrak, the AAV-7A1, was present in the Persian Gulf. This Amtrak is the state-of-the-art descendant of the LVT-1. Though 3 times the weight of its ancestor, the 7A1 can go 3 times faster on land and carry 9 more troops. Though the 7A1s saw limited combat in the Persian Gulf, this simulated assault gives an indication of the 7A1 in action. Water propulsion is provided by 2 14,000-gallon-per-minute water jets. The jets draw water from above the tracks and discharge it to the rear of the vehicle. Deflectors controlled by the steering mechanism vector the water jet stream for steering, stopping, and reversing. This, along with the vehicle's boat-like hull design, give the 7 the ability to negotiate 10-foot plunging seas. The ventilation system has been improved to provide cooler, drier, fresh air for the troops. As the Amtraks approach shallow water, the driver can engage the tracks. The tracks can be used to propel the vehicle with or without the water jets.
1 minute, 7 feet. Stand by low. Low. Out.
Landing on the beach, the 7A1s discharge the Marines via a ramp at the rear of the vehicle. Caught off guard by the flexibility of the 7A1s, the enemy offers little resistance, and Marines secure this lightly defended beach. In the meantime, the vehicles maneuver down the beach to begin the push inland. The 7A1s can transition from landing vehicle to tracked land vehicle without stopping. Now the Amtraks act as armored personnel carriers and move farther inland. The 400 horsepower turbocharged V8 diesel makes light work of any terrain. The combination of improved powertrain and flat track suspension give the 7A1 a land speed of over 45 miles per hour while providing a smooth ride for the troops aboard. During the movement to target, the vehicle's cargo hatches allow the troops a full view field of fire against enemy anti-armor teams. vehicle's aluminum-armored hull provides full protection against direct small arms fire and larger indirect impact, such as shrapnel from mortar fire. The 7A1 is quite capable of taking on a threat by itself. A 50 caliber machine gun mounted in a 360-degree weapon station is run by an electronic system that controls elevation and rotation. As further protection, the 7A1s can generate both fuel smoke and grenade launch smoke. 8 launchers can be fired to screen the vehicle from enemy observation.
Objective, 50 meters at 12 o'clock. Let's go! Go.
As the Marines advance closer to their objective, the 7A1s provide fire support with the machine gun and a 40mm grenade launcher. Aided by this versatile vehicle, these Marines, who were at sea only 2 hours earlier, are now well inland and meeting their objective. This same action without the 7A1, using conventional landing craft and marching by foot, would have taken 2 to 3 days, making casualties inevitable. From Roebling's vision to combat reality, the Amtraks have successfully confronted any challenge set before them, whether it be natural or man-made. Such consistent and reliable performance has guaranteed their presence in the future conflicts of a rapidly changing world.
It appears that large-scale landing operations are not in the future. That there will no longer be landings like Normandy, the Philippines, and Okinawa. It's much more likely that we'll be involved in small wars, such as Desert Storm, where amphibious forces can be tailored to meet the operation, and in this respect, the Navy and Marine Corps team is beautifully suited for amphibious landings.
I think it's essential that the capability of conducting these types of operations be maintained. It's not only essential, it becomes even more imperative in a unstable environment which we're moving into. Absolutely.
In an era of spy satellites and unmanned reconnaissance planes, the perception might be that staged mass invasions belong only to the history of battle. But to this day, just the possibility of such an attack forces the opposition to be prepared for it, and thus keeps amphibious assault very much alive in the strategy of war.